Hi, my name is Mark Johnson, Global Editorial Board Chair for CDO Magazine and Regional Vice President for a company called New Era Technology. I'm really excited today to be with you and to bring this interview to you. I'm actually with Allison Gay, who's with a company called RSM. Allison, it's great to be with you today.
Nice to be with you as well.
Can you share an example
Absolutely.
of a privacy-related project or case that you might work on? What would be some of the
hmm
key challenges and how might you approach them?
Sure. So, for example, with the AI governance, right, recently did an AI assessment, which, as part of that assessment, was their governance around AI. And, you know, we at RSM don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel, right? You can leverage your existing governance for your AI development and use program. However, that being said, AI as an emerging technology is different from other emerging technologies. And so you have to acknowledge that your workflow is not going to be the same. So while you can leverage your existing governance, you need to make some changes and you need to adapt it to what you're doing in the AI space. You need to adapt it to the model development lifecycle. You can't just say, well, we have a software development lifecycle and that's good enough because you tend to have a different workflow.
Exactly.
Um, yes. And so, we help our clients to take a closer look at that. What is their existing governance structure?
hmm
Is it good enough? Because sometimes, it's not as mature as it should be. And then how do they adapt that to the use of AI? And one thing that I really encourage, because as you said, everybody is looking for that competitive edge. Everybody's looking to get their AI out there sooner than everybody else. And so I really encourage organizations to automate wherever you can automate your privacy governance. You should be doing so because that way you get your changes, your engineering changes through the pipeline faster. And unfortunately, I know a lot of organizations want to forego baking in their governance until at a later stage. But with
hmm
AI, that really makes things difficult because if you've already trained that data, you've already most likely used personal data, and now you've used it without governance. So it's
Yeah.
really important to bring that governance in right from the beginning and automate as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really key. On another important note, how do you approach the data breach incidents? And so now we're getting into the place where, maybe the policy, risk and governance, compliance, standards were in
Mhm.
place, but nonetheless, data was breached within an organization. If that happens, what steps do you take to help a client respond to recover from such incidents?
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I think it's really important that you do the work up front because, you have to understand even just the definition of breach, right? And that can change depending on what industry you're in, depending on what countries you operate out of. Every state in the United States has breach notification laws where they, sometimes define breach. And then, of course, all the parameters around when you're required to notify and who you're required to notify. It can get quite complex, and so it's really important that in your incident response plan that you have that clearly defined for your organization. So that means a seat at the table for security, for privacy, for legal. It has to be a cross functional team that's taking a
Right.
look at that, right? And then the tabletop exercises at least once a year or upon like a major change. If you have a new CISO, make sure you do another tabletop exercise so your CISO understands exactly what to expect in an event, right? All of those things are important. And then I highly recommend a tool as far as understanding your breach notification, which is also, they tend to be a repository for your incident data that you collect as you're doing your investigation. And these tools can really help again to automate. I'm big on automation. These tools can really help to automate the process So you're not guessing which states have which rules, what
Right.
applies here, right? It helps sort all that out for you. And then, you can have a human review to just make sure that nothing was missed, because it is based on the information that goes into it. So making sure your information is accurate. Um, and another important pre-step, as we talked about, is encryption. A lot of organizations feel it's not cost effective to encrypt everything. So if you're not encrypting everything, make sure you understand your sensitive data, especially your
Mm.
sensitive personal data, because in the event of a breach, say in California, you could be subject to a private right of action if that data was not encrypted. So encryption is
Mhm.
another major piece that you
Yeah,
need
I'm glad
to do
I'm glad you
beforehand.
mentioned that de-identification and encryption are really key, techniques
Yeah.
that are important. I know there's a pretty significant intersection between, technology engineering and the enforcement compliance side of governance, risk, and compliance as it relates to privacy. And so I imagine you work pretty closely with your systems engineering, with the systems engineering organizations of your clients to, once we have the
Hmm.
framework in place, to understand their obligations, to proactively build in the safeguards that are necessary.
Absolutely.
Hmm. So you kind of proactively answered my question, my next question. So I'm going to skip that and go. We're going to pretty close to wrapping up the interview, but go to the next, it's the second to the last question. What are the top three emerging trends in the field of privacy law that you find particularly interesting or noteworthy today?
Sure. So, this one might seem a little boring, but I think we're going to see a lot more enforcement, right? So GDPR has had some enforcement, of course. They've been out the longest of the new privacy laws. You're going to see the CCPA. You're going to see more enforcement there. But the other laws, the other 13 states, once they really get enacted, um, they're going to start ramping up their enforcement as well. China is working out some guidelines, especially on cross border transfers. And so I think once they sort out that, you're going to see a lot more enforcement from places like China, Brazil. I mean, around the world, we have quite a number of GDPR like laws now.
Hmm.
And I think they're just waiting. So we'll see that increase in 2024, but I think in 2025 and 2026 it'll get even more heftier
Yeah, that's
fines.
that's that's really true. Just as technology evolves and advances, the time from innovation to adoption is compressing rapidly, and so and all of this adoption is driven by data. I mean, all of this
Hmm.
advancement is driven by data and what data informs in the journey, right?
Yeah,
So the implications for privacy just are, multiplying at a nonlinear rate. Well, we're kind
absolutely.
of done with the formal questions, but I want to give you an opportunity to do something that is in holding with the vision, mission of an objective of CDO Magazine, and that is to speak directly to the C-suite executive out there. So that non-technical CEO or chief operating officer or chief legal
Hmm.
counsel, and give them a few kind of key nuggets of kind of a provocation of thought that they can use to ask some of the right questions in their organization to help determine proactively where they stand with regard to readiness, with regard to tabletop exercises that give you the opportunity to understand your readiness,
Hmm.
and where they stand with regard to incident response plans. How can they go ask a few key questions to ensure that their teams are on point with regard to the risk associated with this particular area? Your final word on that.
Sure. I think the biggest question is, do your teams have an idea of the data that they have? Do you have data inventories? Do you have data mapping? Because if you don't know where your data is, if you don't know your use cases for that data, if you don't know your security around that data, if you don't know the technology you're using to transfer or share that data, if you don't know your who you're sharing it with, whether it's internally or externally, you cannot fully understand the risks that you have. You cannot fully mitigate those risks or accept them if that's what you choose to do. And you certainly can't tell if you are fulfilling your promises to the individual. You know, in your privacy notice, the FTC looks at that as a promise to individuals. And how do you know if you're fulfilling that promise if you really don't understand your personal data holdings?
Yeah, that's powerful. And that sort of security privacy risk assessment exercise
Mhm.
that an organization like yours can do with a sponsor of such an engagement being the CEO,
Mhm.
or board chair, really pushing these insight requirements is, I think, sort of an ounce of prevention that is worth more than 10 pounds of a cure, in terms of
Absolutely.
avoiding an incident and understanding the organization's preparedness for being able to respond. Allison, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a fascinating
Sure.
interview, and I think it's going to bring a lot of value to our listeners and readers here. You guys have been with me today as we've listened to Allison Gay, who is National Privacy Services Leader at RSM US.
It's been great talking to you, Mark. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Same here. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And you know where to find more great content like this right here at cdomagazine.tech.